The room was silent. Only the flicker of cameras and murmurs of translators echoed through the grand hall in Dakar. Pam Bondi sat straight, smug and unbothered, her red blazer glowing like a warning sign. The debate had just turned toward Africa's future. Then came the words. America has done so much for Africa. Frankly, Africa owes us. You could hear the gasp in 4 languages. At first, no one responded. Even the moderator blinked in disbelief. It wasn't just arrogance. It was historical erasure, spoken live, across 42 networks and streaming to 31 million people. A Senegalese student watching from a university bar whispered, "She didn't just say that." In a rural Burkinabe village, an old man turned up his radio, his hands trembling. In Johannesburg, TikTokers were already clipping it with the caption, "The nerve." Pam crossed her legs. She smiled, and that's when the camera slowly panned to a young African leader sitting quietly at the far end, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Eyes sharp, face calm, hands folded. He hadn't said a word. But the fire in his silence, it was louder than anything spoken yet. The world didn't know it yet, but Africa was about to answer. Captain Ibrahim Traoré remained silent. Even as the audience stirred, even as hashtags like Nasak Africa, O as No One began trending, even as his name started rising in Google searches around the world, he simply sat. But the world knows silence isn't weakness, not when it belongs to a man who took power not for glory, but to protect his people. Behind him, a young girl from Burkina Faso sat among the youth delegates. She clutched a photo of her father, killed by terrorists when French forces pulled out and left the Sahel exposed. She whispered, "Say something, please." Still, he waited. The next speaker, a minister from France, tried to smooth it over. "Pam meant well," he said. "Let's move on to the next topic." That was it. Traoré slowly stood. The cameras jolted to focus. Every phone in the room lifted. The moderators didn't stop him. How could they? He wasn't scheduled to speak, but when a continent stands, you listen. He looked at Pam Bondi. Then he looked at the audience. And finally, with a voice that carried the weight of centuries, he began. But no one could have prepared for what he would say next. His voice was calm, his French clear, but his words cutting. "Madame Bondi, Africa does not owe you." He paused. The hall froze. "In fact, if we are talking about debt, Africa has paid." He scanned the room. Every eye was on him. "We paid in gold. We paid in rubber, in ivory, in blood, in bones, in silence. And when we rose, we paid in bullets." Gasps. People began to shift uncomfortably. Pam's eyes darted, suddenly unsure. Traoré walked forward slowly. No notes, no teleprompter. "You want to talk about what America did for Africa? Let's also talk about what it did to Africa. Let's talk about the coups, the CIA meddling, the puppet presidents, the stolen resources. You gave us aid after helping build the need for it." A woman in the back wiped her eyes. The girl with the photo of her father pressed it to her chest. And on TikTok, the clip of Traoré saying, "Africa has paid," had already crossed 6 million views in 9 minutes. But Traoré wasn't done. He looked into the camera now, straight into the homes of people across the world. If Africa owes anything, it is only to her ancestors, not her colonizers. You could feel it. Not a whisper, not a breath. The weight of Traoré's words had turned oxygen into stone. Pam Bondi looked frozen, blinking as if trying to wake from a dream that had turned into a global reckoning. The moderator stuttered, "Captain Traoré, this wasn't on the agenda." But it was too late. History doesn't wait for permission. And now every network across the world had switched feeds. TikTok and X were erupting with clips titled, "The Day Africa Stood Up." In a cramped newsroom in Lagos, An intern yelled, "He just broke the internet." But in Dakar, Traoré wasn't thinking about hashtags. He was thinking of the mothers of Sankara and Lumumba, of villages burned and rivers poisoned, of children digging rare earth minerals for phones made in California. He was thinking of the night he cried alone in a hospital hallway after visiting orphans whose families had been wiped out in a drone strike. He continued, "You gave us debt, tied in contracts. You gave us democracy, tied in guns. Africa is not ungrateful, but we are not blind." And in that moment, Pam Bondi wasn't the only one being confronted. The whole world was. Traoré paused. He reached into his jacket. What he pulled out wasn't a policy paper or a speech. It was a letter, worn and folded 100 times. "This was written by a boy in Djibo," he said, holding it up. "His village was attacked, everyone killed. He wrote to me, asking if Africa will ever be free." The room tensed. He read it aloud. "Captain, my name is Soleiman. I am 9 years old. My mom said you were trying to protect us. But my question is, who will protect you?" You could hear sniffles now. A reporter lowered her camera and wiped her face. Traoré's voice cracked just slightly. "That boy was killed 2 weeks later. Stray bullet. No headline, no outrage, no justice." He placed the letter on the podium, then stared into the lens again. "You talk of what Africa owes, but who will repay Soleiman?" The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred, because in that moment this wasn't about politics. It was about pain, about people. And somehow, even the skeptics in the room began to shift. Africa wasn't demanding pity, it was demanding memory. Something changed. A slow sound began, soft, uneven, clapping, first from a Ghanaian delegate, then a South African minister, then a Somali activist in the back row. Soon the entire audience stood, applauding. Not a polite clap, a thunderous one. The kind that says, finally, someone spoke the truth. Pam Bondi didn't look up. But Traoré wasn't looking for applause. He wasn't there to perform. He was there for justice. "This isn't about America versus Africa," he said. "This is about truth versus lies, about remembering the cost of silence." He looked toward the youth delegates. "You do not owe the world shame. You owe your ancestors pride." Outside the conference, a growing crowd of young people had gathered with flags and drums, singing, crying, chanting his name. Inside, the journalists who came for a soundbite were now scribbling something more sacred. A new story, a turning point. "Let this moment mark the day," Traoré said. "Africa no longer whispers. We speak." As the applause roared and the cameras kept rolling, people around the world felt something strange. Not guilt, not anger, but hope. Because finally, Africa was no longer defending herself. She was rising. Less than 2 hours after Traoré's speech shook the world, phones were ringing inside the U.S. State Department. One advisor whispered, "Did he just accuse us on live TV?" Pam Bondi, still reeling, was rushed to a secure hotel. Her team released a statement calling the incident emotional manipulation and a misrepresentation of America's goodwill. But it was too late. The world wasn't listening to spin. They were listening to truth. Across Africa, millions watched Traoré's speech again, crying, clapping, hugging. In Kenya, an old woman said, "He speaks like the sons we lost." In Detroit, a black teenager posted a TikTok, "I've never been to Africa, but that man made me proud of my roots today." Meanwhile, Traoré was on the phone with his chief of security. "Double the guards," he said. "They'll come for us now, not just online." But it wasn't fear in his voice. It was preparation. He had spoken truth in a world built on silence. And now, the empire was stirring. At 2:14 a.m., Traoré's hotel room phone rang. A voice, no name. "You're making enemies, Captain. There's still time to step down from the spotlight." Click. He didn't flinch. He'd been threatened before, by warlords, arms dealers, even his own people. But this felt different. This was global. Outside, protesters stood barefoot in the rain, holding candles, refusing to leave. One held a cardboard sign, "Africa does not kneel." Inside, his advisors argued, "This is getting dangerous. They'll try to isolate us." "We're already isolated," Traoré said. "That's why I spoke." Then he opened his laptop. There it was. Traoré was right. 61 million posts. The speech that shook the world, trending on YouTube. "A new Mandela?" read the New York Times headline. But fame meant nothing. Not when children were still dying in the Sahel. Not when millions still drank from dirty wells. Not when Suleiman's letter still burned in his coat pocket like a wound. Traoré knew. The speech wasn't the battle. It was the opening shot. And the real war was coming. The next morning, the international delegates gathered in an emergency closed-door session. Most avoided Traoré's gaze, except one, Jean-Marc Delacroix, French Minister of Foreign Affairs. He walked up slowly, extended his hand. "Captain, your speech made France uncomfortable." Traoré stared, unsure if it was sarcasm. "And that means," Delacroix added, "it was probably honest." They shook hands. Cameras caught the moment. Two former enemies, one handshake. The image went viral. Some screamed betrayal. Others called it diplomacy. But Traoré didn't care for photo ops. In private, Delacroix whispered, "They're going to try and discredit you now, call you a radical, a fake." "Let them," Traoré said. "I'd rather be hated for the truth than loved for a lie." That night, the New York Post ran a headline, "African rebel sparks global tensions." And in Washington, a think tank quietly published a paper. Is Traoré a threat to the world order? The world wasn't asking if he was right. They were asking how to silence him. And deep down, the audience watching knew, the truth doesn't just echo, it bleeds. The press wanted a second statement. Traoré refused. Instead, he drove quietly, no cameras, no convoy, to a tiny village near Ouagadougou. His mother was waiting on a stool outside. She hadn't seen her son in months. When he stepped from the car, she didn't smile. She cried. "You keep making the world listen," she said, pulling him close. "But I just want my son alive." They sat beneath the neem tree where Traoré used to play as a boy. He looked tired now, not from fear, but from the weight of a continent's hope. "Mama," he said softly, "I didn't ask to speak, but I couldn't stay quiet anymore." She nodded. "Then speak like you have nothing to lose." He took her hand. "I already have." Back in the capital, his team prepared a statement denying rumors that foreign forces were planning sanctions and strategic disruptions. But in truth, they didn't know what was coming, only that it was close. That night, Traoré kissed his mother's hand and whispered to her what he hadn't told anyone else. "If anything happens to me, tell the world, I never stopped loving Africa." It started with one tweet. Traoré's real net worth exposed. $18 million in offshore accounts. Then came fake videos. AI-generated clips showing him partying in Europe. Voice deep-faked recordings saying he sold out Africa to China. The goal was clear. Discredit. Destroy. Drown the truth in noise. Pam Bondi's allies went on Fox News calling him an opportunist, a Marxist, even a potential threat to U.S. interests. But young Africans weren't fooled. A Ghanaian coder made a thread debunking every lie with receipts. A Nigerian activist launched a campaign, Burkina Protect Traoré. But it was the students, thousands across Senegal, Kenya, Rwanda, who did what shocked the world. They organized a 24-hour virtual shield, millions reposting the original speech across every platform every minute. Facebook tried shadow banning it. Didn't work. The truth had found its bodyguards. One student wrote, "You tried to bury him, but you forgot he was a seed." And while the world played digital chess, Traoré disappeared from public view. No tweets, no statements, nothing. And suddenly, people began to fear the worst. He had gone north, to the place where the fight had begun, the Sahel, the region torn apart by war, greed, and silence. Traoré arrived unannounced at a refugee camp near Dori. No guards, no photographers, just him and the smell of dust and memory. He found the burial ground first, rows of rocks, no names. A woman approached, holding a limp child. "Captain," she whispered, "you came back." He took the child, dead, likely from infection and hunger, held it close, just stood there for 5 whole minutes. Even the flies stopped buzzing. Finally, he turned to the camp's doctor. "We just spent $18 million on UN security proposals. How much would it take to save these children?" The doctor shrugged, ashamed. 1 million, maybe less. Traoré looked to the dirt. That dirt soaked in the blood of people the world forgot. Then why is the world protecting systems instead of souls? He didn't cry, but something inside him cracked. He stood and made a quiet vow. "If I must die for this truth, then so be it." It happened just before 3 a.m. Gunfire, explosions. The compound near Kaya, where Traoré was staying, shook like thunder. His guards fought back, outnumbered but not outwilled. They had expected a drone strike. But this? Mercenaries, imported, well-trained, sent to end him in silence. No fingerprints, no flags, just death in the dark. One of his aides took a bullet shielding a sleeping child. Traoré himself fought, bare hands, heart-pounding, leading men who would die for him because he had spoken when no one else dared. They fought for 2 hours. When the dust cleared, 3 attackers lay dead. Traoré stood bleeding from his shoulder, but alive. His team begged him to flee. "Captain, they'll be back." "Then let them. You don't understand. The world won't protect you." "I'm not asking it to." He looked to the sky, still red from fire. "I was never trying to survive this. I was trying to wake Africa." 3 days later, Traoré attended the funeral of his aide, the one who died shielding that child. He insisted on carrying the coffin. No cameras, no generals. Just a young leader carrying his fallen brother down a dirt path lined with mourners. He gave no speech, but as he knelt beside the grave, a whisper escaped his lips. "Forgive me." The mother of the aide stepped forward. She was silent at first. Then she raised Traoré to his feet. "My son followed you because you told the truth. Don't stop now, even if they kill you." She handed him a necklace. It was his. Wear it. For him. For us. As he put it on, something rippled across the continent. It wasn't politics. It was purpose. From Bamako to Banjul, Nairobi to Niamey, murals of Traoré holding the coffin began appearing overnight. Artists painted him with wings, with fire in his eyes, with Suleiman at his side. No longer just a leader, a symbol. And with symbols, you cannot kill the truth. In Ouagadougou, a boy no older than 12 snuck into a youth press conference. He raised his hand, nervous, shaking. "Captain Traoré," he said into the mic, "they say you might die soon. Is that true?" Gasps. Journalists froze. Security moved forward, but Traoré lifted his hand. "Let the boy speak. If you die, will we still have hope?" Traoré walked to him, knelt down, took the mic. "What's your name?" "Emmanuel." "Well, Emmanuel," he said, "if I fall, you don't cry for me. You rise for me." The boy started crying. So did his mother in the back row. So did the reporters, some of whom had written hit pieces days before. Traoré pulled the mic close. Africa's story does not end with one voice. It ends when the next generation stops believing they have one. He turned to the cameras, streaming to millions again. If they silence me, let my echo live in you. It was the shortest speech he ever gave, but it became the most replayed video in African history, because in just 36 seconds, he passed the torch. And millions caught it. 2 days after the Kenya summit, Traoré received a private call. It was from Caroline Leavitt. She didn't sound proud or political, just human. "I've been meeting African students here in New York," she said. "I realize something, Captain. The children you defend? They're not angry, they're brilliant, and they still believe in us, even when we failed them." Traoré said nothing for a moment, then softly replied, "They don't want to hate you, Caroline. They just want to be heard." There was a pause. Then Caroline said something no one expected. "I want to come to Burkina Faso, not with cameras, not with press, just to see what I never saw before." Traoré closed his eyes, smiled. "Come, and bring your heart." The next week, Caroline arrived in a small village outside Ouagadougou. No news crew, just her, a backpack, and trembling hands. She washed her face from a hand-dug well, sat under a tree with girls who braided her hair, ate with elders who told her stories of pain and pride. That night she cried herself to sleep, because she had finally learned history, not from books, but from people. On May 25th, Africa Day, Traoré hosted a global broadcast. No military parade, no flags, just a circle of elders, children, and citizens under a baobab tree. He stood barefoot beside Caroline. The world tuned in. Over 900 million views, the most watched live stream in YouTube history. Traoré began, "We are not here to shame anyone. We are here to rise, together." He turned to Caroline. "Do you want to say anything?" She stepped forward, voice shaking. "I once called Africa a mess, but today I know I was the one who was lost. You didn't need saving. I did. I'm sorry." There was silence, then a whisper in the crowd, "We forgive you." Children began to sing a soft African lullaby. Old women danced barefoot, and Traoré, he looked up at the sky and whispered, "Mama, I did it." From South Africa to Senegal, from Haiti to Harlem, people cried. Forgiveness didn't erase history, but it began healing it. And for the first time in centuries, Africa was not begging. Africa was leading. 6 months later, school curriculums changed. New history books were printed, with chapters about colonization, struggle, resistance, and the rise of a man named Ibrahim Traoré. Omar. He was now on a scholarship in Ghana, studying to become a teacher. Caroline. She launched an initiative to sponsor rural African schools, working silently behind the scenes. And Traoré? He stood on no throne. He wore no crown. But he walked with 1 million ancestors in his steps and 1 billion children in his heart. One morning he stood on the same ground where his mother once begged for medicine and opened a new children's hospital in her name. "This is not revenge," he said. "This is restoration." The crowd wept, and so will your viewers, because this story is not fantasy. It is possible. It is what happens when one man speaks truth and refuses to be silenced. If you watch to this point, it means your heart is awake. If this story moved you, let it move the world. Drop a comment. What part broke you? What part healed you? We want to hear your truth. Like this video so more people can find it. And please, subscribe if you believe stories like this must live on. Share this with someone who needs to learn history. And never forget, Africa is not broken. She is rising.